Hello, everyone. I'm going to get started. It's at 9:40, so everybody can hear me okay? All right, wonderful. Today we're going to be talking about, it's an integration problem. You know, it's a very popular integration that we see out there in the community and also in the market, which is integrating Alfresco with Liferay. Does anybody, can I see the show of hands, people who know what Liferay is? Okay, great. So most of you know what Liferay is. And I'm assuming the reason you're here is because you're interested in basically understanding the right way to do it. Okay, so integration problems in general, the reason they're perceived as being complex is because of a very simple thing. It's because there are several ways to do it. You know, and identifying the right way to do it is the challenge, you know, and that's what people, you know, call the best practices around integrating any two things together, any two products together. You know, Alfresco and Liferay, as companies, they've had a relationship for a long time. There are some integrations that they did together. We, as a company, as a partner of Alfresco and a partner of Liferay, we've also done several integrations. So what I'm going to share with you right now is basically all of the lessons that we've learned after going through all of these integrations. And I hope to have like enough Q&A time for you guys to just ask and, you know, tell me if what you think we're saying is right, or if you disagree with it. You know, I'd be very interested to get your feedback. Before I jump into the presentation, I just want to talk a little bit about the company I'm representing. So the company is called Rivet Logic Corporation, and we are an award-winning professional services firm. What we basically do is we actually changed our messaging recently to say that we build digital experiences. That could be anything that is digital, right? It's not only websites. It's not only portals. It's not only mobile applications, it's all of the above, right? And the interesting thing is that at the same time we did that, Liferay and Alfresco also changed their messaging to say exactly the same thing. So everybody is trying to say, I am not use case oriented. I'm a technology, and you can use me to build, you know, to address any type of use case that is digital that you have, that has some user experience part to it, which sounds very front-endy, I guess, but that's the direction that we're moving to, you know. So everybody was so focused on the back end so far, and now what we expect to see next year is that all of our clients are asking for mobile, all of our clients are asking for responsive web design and adaptive design, and, you know, the front end is going to be the thing to talk about next year. So as you can see down here, we are a partner of Alfresco and Liferay, but we also have a partnership with Crafter Software, so that's the WCM solution that sits on top of Alfresco. Recently we have a partnership with MongoDB as well, you know, so if you guys have any questions about big data and these types of use cases, I'd be very curious to hear about that. So the agenda for the talk here is basically, we're going to ask the question, why should we integrate? Right? What are the advantages of doing that? Right? Each one of you here probably has a reason why they want to integrate. And I hope, like, what I would urge you to do is try to validate those reasons today. You know, try to see if you're going down the right path, you know, or not, because there are some wrong paths that we're going to be talking about. The other thing is, okay, if we're convinced that we should integrate Liferay and Alfresco, then how do we do it? You know, so, and also, if we go through this kind of logic and find out that we shouldn't integrate, it's important for you to know that you should not integrate, right? So integration is not always going to be a good solution, all right? And then the final question is, how do we do it, right? So to answer these questions, we have to understand those two products really well, Alfresco and Liferay. The reason I say this is because Alfresco and Liferay have are two products. They're completely separate, right? And they have evolved independently. And what ended up happening is they started to have some overlap, right? There are a lot of features that you see in Liferay that also exist in Alfresco. So that created naturally a lot of confusion. A lot of people come to us and say, I want to use Liferay. And then, but my colleague wants to use Alfresco. It's a different department, let's say. And we're fighting over this. We want to go with Liferay, and these guys want to go with Alfresco. And where they end up at the end, after going through all of this, a lot of meetings and going through a lot of Q&A with them, is that they need both. It's not that they need one or the other. They need both. But the reason they're struggling is because they don't know how these things could sit together harmoniously, right? Because when you have an overlap, that always creates a problem, an integration problem. So Alfresco, for all intents and purposes, is a content management platform, right? It's an ECM. It's really more of like a document repository now, right? I mean, Alfresco itself has changed. It used to have WCM as part of it, but it doesn't anymore, and that's why there's the Crafter solution. But it is an enterprise content management system, right? And where Alfresco is very powerful is when it sits in its own tier, in the ECM tier, right? And independent of the use cases and the applications that have content management needs, right? So Alfresco has excelled in being that back-end piece and having very rich APIs and service layers that you can use to build any application that you want, right? And integrate it into Alfresco. Also with the new, the hybrid cloud and everything that's going on right now with Alfresco, from a deployment perspective, when you're looking at your content, you can also, kind of divvy up your content into secure content that needs to be on-premise or behind the firewall, and public content that could be outside of the firewall. And they have a synchronization solution, which is the hybrid cloud. It's a very powerful solution. But again, it's all around my content. It's very content-centric, right? Content is everything in Alfresco. So if you look at kind of the way Alfresco is laid out, so the service layer I was talking about, which is right here, that is the layer that you use to integrate into Alfresco, right? So you guys know what Alfresco Share is? Everybody knows Alfresco Share? So Alfresco Share is a use case. It's one use case, right? It's a collaboration use case that utilizes Alfresco. It just so happened that Alfresco built it, right? You could have built it, right? So Alfresco Share is not really what Alfresco is. It's just a use case out there that addresses a very specific need, right? But there's also the records management. There's also the case management. These are different use cases, and they're all using the same repository in the back end, right? So document management is basically one of the things that Alfresco can do, right? We all know that. The other one is collaboration. So Alfresco Share is the collaboration solution, right? Alfresco built Alfresco Share as a Microsoft SharePoint alternative. That's the only reason they built it, right? Some people have taken Alfresco Share and customized it to make it something completely different. And I think if there are any of you here who did that, you're probably realizing that that was a bad idea, right? Because it really is that use case. It's a collaboration use case. There's also file sharing. That's another use case that a lot of people use Alfresco for. Everybody here knows what Dropbox is, and Google Drive, and those types of file sharing solutions. So a lot of people are asking Alfresco the question, are you going to build something like Dropbox? Are you going to, the reason they're asking this is because it makes sense for Alfresco to do this. And I think one day, maybe soon, I'm not speaking, I'm just my gut feeling, right? If I look at my crystal ball, I think they're going to end up doing something like Dropbox at some point in time because it makes a lot of sense for them to do that. Now, the web content management use case in Alfresco is one that you won't hear a lot of people talking about because Alfresco, as a company, they don't think of themselves as a web content management solution. All right? They think of themselves as a document management solution. But the fact of the matter is the Alfresco repository itself is very powerful. It's very generic. You can actually use it to implement the web content management solution. So there is a solution out there called Crafter. There's a company called Crafter Software that has a full-fledged web content management solution on top of Alfresco, much like Adobe CQ5, right? It just has pretty much all those same features. And Russ Danner, VP of products from that company, was here and gave a talk about it. So there's some slides here, for you guys can look at later. But it is a valid use case. That's the point for Alfresco. The other one is records management, right? So that's what Alfresco is. So now let's look at Liferay, all right? Liferay, like I said, is a portal, or it started out that way, and the main use case for Liferay has been for intranets, extranets, customer portals. Like if you guys, when you log into online banking, right, that's a portal. Or if you have an intranet in your company, that's a portal. It is a standard-based portal, so there's an actual spec called the JSR 286 specification, and Liferay is one of those. If you want to compare apples to apples, the competitors for Liferay they're not Alfresco actually, they are IBM WebSphere, or Oracle is a Web Center. I forgot what it's called, but it's a portal basically, right? So it started that way though, right? But it has evolved a lot over the past decade to become more of an operating system. Actually, if you talk to the CTO of Liferay, he's going to say Liferay is an OS, is a web OS. The reason he says this is because just the nature of portals is that you can build something called portlets, which are little mini applications, and you can put them on a screen side by side on one page, right? And the way Liferay works is that mini application does not have to be a Java application. It could actually be a PHP app, sitting inside of a portlet, right next to a JSF app, which is a completely different web framework, right next to just a regular JSP app. And they can all coexist within this web OS, right? So you can see already that, that's very different from Alfresco, right? And the main use cases are the ones that you see on the left side here, is for, you can aggregate all of these applications onto one page, right? So if you want to build the dashboard, for example, portals are great for that, right? If that dashboard is pulling data from 10 different places in the back, and you want one screen that shows all that stuff, and it's personalized, and there's security, that is honored here, then portals are just wonderful for that use case. Okay, so that's what Liferay is really good at, all right? But, actually, I'll get to that next. Actually, this is not important. But they also have document management, all right? And as a matter of fact, so as you can imagine, the document management and Liferay started out very weak, right? So when people compared Liferay DM to Alfresco DM, Alfresco would always win, like hands down, Like they didn't even have check-in, check-out, So, but over the past years, this gap has become smaller and smaller and smaller. So Liferay's document management features now are very powerful, and they have metadata, they have check-in, check-out, they have workflow, they have the ability to connect over CMIS to any repository, so it's very powerful. So it's a valid use case now within Liferay. They also have collaboration. So Liferay, just like Alfresco has Alfresco Share, Liferay has something called Liferay Social Office. And it's exactly the same thing. It's addressing the social collaboration problem, which is SharePoint. It's a SharePoint alternative, okay? And you know how in Share you can create a site, right? And the site comes with a calendar and a document library and a discussion forum and like that. A Liferay Social Office is exactly the same. You create a site and you get all those same things, all right? Liferay also has now a pretty significant web content management piece to it. So you can build websites on Liferay, okay? rosettastone.com is on Liferay, for example. That's a website. It's a revenue-generating site. You wouldn't think that a portal would be used that way, right? But there are people who are doing that right now. SesameStreet.org is on Liferay, Team Beachbody, if anybody here works out with P90X, is on Liferay, So it's a real use case here as well. So the problem is this. The overlap is too big, right? So that's why when people are thinking of integration between those two products, and this is their view of what Liferay and Alfresco is, it's almost impossible for you to come up with a good solution. If you are inside here, and this is what you want, then you're going to end up having people who are pro-Liferay and people who are pro-Alfresco, and they end up quarreling to no end. It's an unending quarrel. Because we've worked with clients for over a year, and they have a big question mark here, and they're still undecided. For more than a year, they're still undecided. That's ridiculous, right? But the good news is that it doesn't have to be that way, right? So why integrate those two? If they're so much alike, then why not just pick one and stick with it and just forget about it, right? The reason is it's all about how you look at the two products. It's the lens that you put on your eyes when you're looking at those two products, okay? So I'm going to give you now a different way to look at it, right? So look at Alfresco as a repository that gives you these use cases, but it sits down here, all right? It is an independent tier. It's your ECM tier, and that's all it is. So think of Alfresco from this point on forward as a database, okay? Just like MySQL or Oracle, just for now, all right? Think about it that way. And all of these things up here, they could be anything, right? Any application, any use case that has some document management needs, all right? And now let's look at Alfresco's strengths. Alfresco is very good at certain things, but it also does all these other things just so that, it looks good on paper, right? Any product in the world is like this. So let's focus on the strengths. What are they? It is really, really good as a headless repository. If you use it that way, you're not going to have problems, okay? It also has a lot of content services that come with it out of the box, and that is what enables you to build those use cases that we saw back there, the records management, collaboration, all that stuff. And it's also extensible, so you can change those, you can add to those APIs, you can add your own custom APIs. And there's a lot of work that happened here in the community, so at Rivet Logic, we've actually contributed a very powerful library here that allows you to, it's a Java library, and we're going to talk about it in a second, but it's a Java library that allows you to integrate any application, any web application that sits independent outside of Alfresco into Alfresco and utilize all of its services, okay, remotely, without having to deal with REST APIs and this whole, layer. It does it for you. It's also good as an internal-facing social document collaboration, to underline the word document here, because Alfresco is really good when you're dealing with documents. Granted, you can put anything in Alfresco. Like you can put a node in Alfresco that is pure metadata and has no binary content at all. You can do that. But that's not Alfresco's strength. Alfresco's strength is around documents, all right? It also has, with the Crafter solution, it has a really good web content management solution, all right? And I'm going to talk about, I said Liferay has the same thing, right? But Liferay's web content management solution is not that great, all right? And I'm going to speak about that. WCM with Alfresco and Crafter is equivalent to the over $1 million licensing fee companies out there like Adobe CQ5 and Interwoven, and those companies. You can actually compare them apples to apples, and in some cases, Crafter wins, even though it's much cheaper. Okay, so these are the Alfresco strengths. The other one, this is WCM related, is that you can publish that content to anything. Okay, it could be a file system, it could be an FTP site, it could be a mobile application, mobile device, it could be anything you want it to be, pretty much, right? And this is called multi-channel publishing. So that's something you can do with Alfresco right now, if you're using the Crafter solution. And that's a very powerful thing, because that's kind of it's a must-have feature of any web content management solution today. That's worth its salt. Okay. Now, if we look at Liferay in using that same lens, forget all of the stuff that we said, that it can do, because they are trying to say we can do everything, right? And let's focus on their strengths. They are a really good aggregation framework. It comes with a lot of applications out of the box. That's another powerful thing about Liferay. It has over 60 applications that come out of the box. One of these applications is a blog, for example. One of them is a forum. One of them is a calendar. And it has, 54 more, right? But majority of them you're probably never going to use. But it comes with a lot out of the box, and that is a differentiator for them. Okay. So Liferay's strengths are that it is a portlet container. I mean, that's how it was built originally, right? That's what it really is. So if you want to use it as a portal, it's a no-brainer. It's always going to win over Alfresco. Alfresco, there's no portal solution in Alfresco. If you want to build an intranet on Alfresco today, you have to pretty much build it from scratch, right? If you want to build an intranet on Liferay, just downloading Liferay and installing it, you're already 80% done, okay? And you just have to do the 20% extra to be finished. Another one is from the aggregation perspective, that there's a lot of flexibility on the front end with Liferay. So the visual aspect, this is under the personalization umbrella and the look and feel umbrella. You can make all of these things look like a nice dashboard with the same styling, and it looks really nice, even though what you're integrating with in the back could be anything. It could be whatever it is. So one of the things we did with Liferay, for example, is, you guys know what Alfresco Webscripts are? Yeah? So, no? Okay. Who does not know what an Alfresco Webscript is? Don't be shy. Okay. So Alfresco Webscript is basically, it's a free marker template with a face on it, or the UI, and it has access to all of the Alfresco services in the back, and it has you can use JavaScript to access those services, or free marker, and it sits inside of Alfresco. But then using a URL, you can actually get that widget and put it on screen. So one of the things we did with Liferay to integrate those web scripts to like, just thinking of it as an aggregation layer, is we have a portlet in Liferay that will expose a web script from Alfresco and put it on the screen. And it gets intercepted, right, before it reaches the screen, and you can do anything you want with the markup. So you can change its styling to make it look similar to your portal styling. So that's something you can do with Liferay. It's very powerful when you're doing the type of aggregation. It also comes out of the box with a complete security solution. So Liferay today is a SAML 2.0. What do they call that? Identity provider. Okay, so you can actually use it as your single sign-on solution and have applications authenticate against it. You can do that. It can also authenticate against so many different types of single sign-on solutions out of the box. Okay, so it's very powerful. People can usually just take it, drop it in, connect it to whatever they want, and it becomes part of their infrastructure very quickly. Again, that's the intranet type of use case where something like this is critical, right? So when you look at the two products that way, you start and then ignore the document management and and the web content management. So ignore the document management in Liferay and web content management use cases in Liferay, and focus more on aggregation. Ignore the Alfresco's portal solutions, and you end up with a much better view of these two products. The overlap is much smaller now, right? And you're probably going to end up having some needs here and some needs here, and all of a sudden it makes sense to integrate, right? Because you don't have that overlap. So the point is, and by the way, I'm saying it like it sounds so simple, right? But it took people years and years to figure this out. Because the key, the trick, is to identify the best of both worlds, right? You get the best features of Liferay that Alfresco doesn't have, the best features of Alfresco that Liferay doesn't have, and then all of a sudden it's just going to make so much sense to integrate. So talking about integration now, what are the keys to being successful, okay? So this is kind of, you can think of this as lessons learned from Rivet Logic, sharing it with you guys after doing dozens of these types of integrations. You don't want to have too much, it's not overlap, but you don't want to have you don't want to have too many touch points, right? Or integration points. Because every single integration point adds a layer of complexity to the overall solution, right? So you'll always see that if you can just make do with Alfresco and not have to use Liferay, that's going to be a simpler solution, right? If you can make do with Liferay and not use Alfresco, that's a simpler solution as well. But there are a lot of people out there who really need to integrate the two. Oops, what happened? A lot of people who really need to integrate the two applications, two solutions, because they're not okay with just making do with Liferay's mediocre document management solution, right? They want more. So those are the people who say, I cannot make do with only one. I really need both, okay? So try to minimize those touch points as much as possible, just so that it becomes the solution becomes less complex and easier to maintain, okay? The other one is you need to have clear interfaces. What I mean by this is whenever you start integrating things together, right? A lot of people make a mistake of just focusing on this one integration, right? So Liferay and Alfresco, we're just integrating here, and they create an API, right? An interface to integrate the two. And then another application comes along, and now you want to integrate, so you say, okay, I want to integrate this application, and then you create an interface for that application, right? And then you end up with 20 applications, and each one has its own interface to integrate. Then that's a very bad thing, right? Is it obvious why it's a bad thing? Yeah. Because you have to maintain all that, right? It would be much better if you think like in a long-term, with a long-term vision first. Say I am going to create an integration layer that satisfies 99%. If I could say 100% of my current and future integration needs, that would be great, right? How do you do that? You just basically generalize your integration, right? Don't make your APIs too specific to the use case. Don't ever have an interface with an API in it that says create contract. Let's say you have an application where you're storing contracts in here, right? In Alfresco, or from Liferay into Alfresco. If you create an API called create contract, then you're talking about contracts inside of your API. You want your API to be more generic, so create object, right? That's more generic. And then define that it's a contract in its arguments, right? That's a better and clearer interface that you can rely on and not have to have so many different interfaces and end up with a mess on your hands, right? The other one, this is very critical, is you want to have a single source for your data. Whenever you integrate two applications together, you end up with this issue, right? Where I might need to synchronize the two, right? So I might need to get the data from one and put it in the other. So take data out of Alfresco, put it inside of Liferay. And the minute you do that, you have redundancy of your data. And you start having to worry automatically about all of the data integrity issues, right? And make sure that you don't get out of sync, okay? Because when you get out of sync, it's very difficult to get back in sync again, right? So try to keep your data in one place, and instead of making copies of it, just have APIs that expose that data directly from there, right, to the best of your ability. You know, I know it's not always going to be easy to do this, but you at least have to try, right? And when we're talking about the flow of data, it is basically a good idea to have it a unidirectional, right? Because as soon as you start, so imagine Alfresco or Liferay and Alfresco, and you're doing a synchronization, right, from Alfresco to Liferay. So to you, Alfresco is read-only, right? The minute you say, I'm going to start writing into Alfresco from Liferay, and it becomes bidirectional, you are opening the gates of hell, basically. And you know, there are going to be a lot of unforeseen problems, right, where you overwrote something, you know, or you know, two people are working on the same piece of content, and one of them is stale, and the stale one overwrote the new one, you know, because you're going in both directions. So it's really, really important, again, just like it's important to have single sources of data, it's very important to try to the best of your ability to have unidirectional flow. And if you can't, then at least you tried, right? But a lot of people out there, they don't even try. They just go with like bidirectional sync and have copies, different copies of the same content, even though they could have avoided that, you know, and they end up with a huge mess on their hands, and it becomes a very difficult problem to solve. All right, so now let's talk about all the types of integrations that don't work, okay? And then we're going to talk about the integrations that do. So this is from Top Gear. I don't know, some of you guys might have seen this before, but the idea here is that these guys, you know, had a challenge and said, well, we're going to build this contraption here where the guy in the bottom vehicle controls the gas, the accelerator, and the guy on top controls the steering, and let's see if they can drive, right? They're not communicating with each other, right? And let's see if they can figure it out. There's a lot of integrations out there that are actually like this today, Alfresco and Liferay, all right? And the reason they fail is very simple. It's because they did not take any of what we said so far into consideration, right? And it's like you can be guaranteed that these types of integrations will fail, right? Where you are using the products but not the way they ought to be used, okay? So we're going to go through some of those real types of integrations that exist out there and have failed, okay? So here's one of them, all right? Authoring of content in Liferay and storing it in Alfresco, and then reading it from Alfresco into Liferay, okay? A lot of people do that, where they author their actual content in Liferay, even though Liferay is supposed to be the aggregation platform. It's just the face, right? But they author here, right? And the reason this is not good is because you are now, the people, not the visitors, right? But the people who are your own content managers are having to deal with these two products now, right? So they need to understand how this thing works down here, this thing called Alfresco, because this is where my content is going. But they also need to know how Liferay works, because that's where they're logging in to author their content, okay? So it's not that it's bad per se, but it's much more complex, okay? And it ends up becoming kind of clunky, and now all of a sudden when you want to upgrade, let's say Liferay, then you're affecting everybody in your organization, right? Who are the authors. You know, your visitors, they're going to be fine pretty much most of the time. So that's a common mistake here, is that when people are architecting these types of solutions, they're always thinking about the end user. They're not thinking much about the people who are going to maintain this thing and make sure it's successful. So, and they are the ones who will make it successful, right? Your own people who are maintaining, your IT people, your content managers, they're the ones who are going to make it successful, right? Another one, which is a horrible thing to do, is authoring in both, all right? So you author in Alfresco, and you author in Liferay, and you have bidirectional synchronization, and then if you don't have very good control over this and make sure you don't run into any data integrity issues or things getting out of sync, then you will end up having a big problem because you don't have one source of truth. I think I explained that importance of doing that enough, but that's the reason why this is a bad idea, okay? So let's now look at patterns that do work. So these are the good ways to integrate. One of them is to manage your documents in Alfresco. So author down here, all right, all your documents, and then use Liferay as just the view, right? So Liferay, so the way the view, anything that is presentation related is in Liferay, and everything else is in Alfresco, right? That way, your authors, your people who are dealing with content, they only need to understand Alfresco, okay? They don't need to worry about Liferay. Liferay is just one of those use cases for Alfresco, right? That we were talking about. So I could put case management right here. I could put records management right here next to Liferay, okay? That makes a lot more sense. But with Liferay, it also makes more sense to just make Alfresco kind of read-only, right? So that you continue to have this unidirectional data, flow of data. Another one is to, so this one back here, if I can go back, this is a pull, right? So I'm querying Alfresco and pulling data out. Another way to do it, which is still good, is to do a push, right? So and this makes more sense if you're, okay, I'm not going to say web content management, but you could push anything, right, out of Alfresco, and then Liferay consumes it and displays it, but you never write back. If I had put another arrow writing back down here, then this immediately becomes a bad integration, okay? Another one, which is it makes a lot of sense, but you have to kind of buy into the Alfresco WCM use case to do this, is to manage your web content inside of Alfresco, all right? The enterprise web content that is meant to be published to different channels, different websites. It could be, the destination could be anything. And Liferay becomes one of those destinations, right? And then you publish it out to the delivery engine, right? And then use Liferay to expose that content. So this is similar to the first one, the query one that we were looking at before, except this is more around the web content management use case. The reason this has a slide of its own is because the web content management use case is a very big use case. It's like, how many of you have a website in your organization or more than one site, right? And you're already using Alfresco. So anybody who has Alfresco and has a website, should be looking at this, to be honest, because you could manage all of this content and display it. So let me put an example here. Let's ground this with an example. So you have a press release that's being authored down here in Alfresco, okay? And this press release needs to be published to 300 different sites, okay, that are internal, okay? I mean, they're not internal, they're your sites, okay? They are external, public-facing, but they are your sites. And each one of these sites have a different look and feel, different styling, so the press release needs to look different in each one of these sites, okay? And at the same time, you want to tell your people inside of your company, through the intranet that is on Liferay, you want to show them that press release as well so that they get excited about what's happening, right? That's what this is for, So you can imagine the 300 sites are sitting out there at the same level as Liferay, and all of these the same press release, one source of truth, right, is being published out to all of them, and they are consuming that press release, and they are using their own styling to show that press release on a page, okay? So that's what this means, and that's a very powerful use case, okay? And if any of you, if this makes sense to any of you, I'd like to hear from you to see. Again, like I said, these are all lessons we've learned, so you can disagree, right? This is not written in stone in any way. All right, so we've seen the wrong way to do integration. We've seen the right way to do integration, right? So now let's look at the tools that you can use to do integration. So we at Rivet Logic, we have spent several years trying to facilitate this type of integration. Now, we did it for ourselves, but we did it in a way to help the open source community as well. So everything that I'm going to show you that is Rivet Logic, everything that I show you that is Rivet Logic owned, like a project that we created, is going to be, it's open source. And the reason we did it is because we did it for ourselves first, and then we contributed it to the community, and now everybody out there is using these tools. So what are some of the tools? Let's first talk about the ones that are not Rivet Logic related. One is CMIS. Who does not know what CMIS is? Nobody. Awesome. So CMIS is a protocol, right? And Alfresco supports that protocol. And you can communicate to Alfresco over CMIS. So if you want to do a Liferay to Alfresco integration, Liferay as a portal, their document repository supports mounting any CMIS compliant repository. So you can actually go to Liferay, configure it, and you connect it to Alfresco out of the box. And all of your documents that are in Alfresco are exposed in the Liferay's document management user interface, okay? That's one tool. The other one is through the Webscripts that we talked about, right? So you can expose Webscripts inside of Liferay, right? And that gives you some functionality, like widgets that you could use, right? And now let's talk about the open source rivets that we built. So a very powerful one is the remote Alfresco API Rivet. It's a Java-based API, and don't worry about any of this stuff down here, okay? Basically, we are taking care of every single thing that happens from the moment you make a call into that Java API, which has pretty much a one-to-one mapping with the Alfresco Foundation services. And it will take care of making a RESTful call into Alfresco, executing that call on the server side, getting the result back, and giving it back to you, okay? So if you didn't have this, and you wanted to integrate your Java application into Alfresco, you end up building this. So it just made so much sense for us to contribute this so that people don't have to keep building this over and over again, right? Yes?
1 second. We talked a little bit about this in our CMIS talk, so I thought
This is Russ Danner, by the way, from Crafter Software.
Hi. So we talked a little bit in an earlier session about different advanced integration with using CMIS with Alfresco. So I wanted to bring this up because it's a point that we made. CMIS is a standards-based interface, and RAAr is something that Rivet built. But CMIS is not transactional. Like, you can't do multiple actions within a transaction. But with RAAr, you can. So I think that's a major difference there, not just that it's directly Alfresco's APIs, but that it's transactional.
Yeah, thanks. That's absolutely right. And there's also other other advantages to using RAAr. For example, there are some bulk operations, bulk operation APIs that this library has. So that, for example, if you want to move 1,000 documents, right? If you want to use Alfresco's API directly, you'd make 1,000 calls, right? 1,000 move calls. If you do that over the wire here, that you end up with a performance problem, right? It doesn't scale very well. So RAAr has an API that says, you give me the 1,000 IDs of those documents and tell me what the destination is, and all this happens in a loop, right, on the server side. So the performance is much better. Another one is this thing. It's called Secure Token Authentication Rivet. All this does is basically, whenever you have this type of integration, right, you're executing an API inside of Alfresco, and you're executing it from Liferay, right, or any external application. A lot of people, what they do is they create a system user, right, and all of these APIs get executed as that user, and that user has admin rights, can execute any API, and they control the security in the application, right? So all of a sudden, you're relying on the people from outside who are integrating into you to honor the security and do it the right way, right? The problem with that is you should not, I mean, you never know what people are going to do, so people can actually end up really hurting you from a security perspective unless you do a lot of audits and stuff like that. So what this does is, this is an authentication component that sits inside of Alfresco, and it allows you to propagate the identity of the user that's logged into Liferay or any external application all the way to Alfresco and execute the API as that user, all right? So user Bob exists here. Alfresco knows about Bob. Alfresco knows Bob has read-only access. Bob, same user, logs into the portal and tries to write something, right? Execute a write. Somehow there's a bug over here in this application on the portal side. They're able to somehow make a call to write data into Alfresco. With this thing, this call that happens here is executed in Alfresco as Bob, so it's going to fail because Bob has read-only rights. Okay, if you had a system level, user here and didn't do this at all, then it would be Bob would be able to write data into your repository because nobody's checking that. Okay, so that's what this is for. The other one is, I told you guys about this already. So it's the Webscripts that we talked about. So to expose them inside of Liferay, you can use this portlet that we created called Alfresco Webscript Portlet. You put it on the screen, you configure it, you give it the URL to the Webscript, and you can also give it authentication information, or out of the box it uses this to execute the Webscript calls, right? So it does it automatically for you, all right? And of course, the other one is Crafter. So like I said, Crafter is not part of Alfresco. Crafter is a solution, is a web content solution that addresses the WCM need that the people who use Alfresco have today. So this is web content management. The entire experience of web content management is taken care of by Crafter software. I'm not gonna this is a big thing. So the reason we have it here under open source rivets is because we actually created this Rivet Logic, and then we spun it off as its own company this year. So Crafter software is a separate company from Rivet Logic now, but it started out as a rivet, just like the other rivets that we were looking at. It's just very big, and the other rivets are very small. All right, so because it's big, I think it makes sense to show you this. Remember, I showed you this is one of the use cases that work, right? This is one of the integrations that work. And Crafter allows you to author your content in Alfresco, publish it out to a delivery endpoint, and then on the Liferay side, there's something called the Crafter plugin or Crafter Portlet that we built that allows you to show something like that press release that I was talking about, show it in Liferay. So we did some work here on the Rivet Logic side to allow you to expose this type of enterprise web content without having to build it yourself. Okay. So I'm going to skip the case study. This is just about Sesame Street. It's a big Alfresco Liferay integration. So I'm going to skip this so that we have some time for questions. If you have anything, if you want to ask me about this, please come over and talk to me about it. So that's it. I'm done. Any questions from anybody? Yes.
What happens if there's a upgrade of Alfresco? Do you have to go back and update your stuff as well?
That's an excellent question. If you are using, so the answer is no. They're completely decoupled, and that's a good thing. That's one of the reasons why integration is good, because with Liferay and Alfresco, is, if you were doing all this in Alfresco Share, your front end, and you customize Alfresco Share a lot, then you would have to upgrade your front end when you want to get some back end features, right? But with this approach, they're completely decoupled. So you can upgrade Alfresco without upgrading Liferay. You can upgrade Liferay without upgrading Alfresco. But that layer in the middle, that's much easier to deal with. That's just APIs, So if that changes a little bit because of the upgrade, you can quickly fix that without having to so it doesn't become a big project to upgrade. Yes, there's a question back there.
So I was looking at one of the suggestions you were making about Liferay, not Liferay, the integration of a portal with the Alfresco, where you mentioned that use portal as just a presentation layer and authoring done separately. So would we build a separate authoring component to write to Alfresco, or would that be a piece within Liferay or anything, which would be talking directly to Alfresco? What do you mean by that?
So yeah. So the authoring in Alfresco, you basically have authoring options in Alfresco out of the box. If it's documents that you're dealing with, you could use Alfresco Share as just an authoring, as just a way for you to push content in there, push documents into Alfresco. You can certainly build your own, or you can use also something like Crafter. So Crafter is a way for you to manage authoring applications, or manage the authoring of any content. It doesn't have, it is a web content management solution, but you could utilize it to also author, just push content into Alfresco and pull it out and do something with it, So, you can think in generic terms like that, but you could certainly also use, build your own authoring application that pushes content directly into Alfresco. And again, when you do that, you own that user interface, and back to the upgrade question, upgrades become simpler because your authoring application is not tied into this very low-level repository that you typically upgrade when you just need something that is at that level. And the front end needs to stay out of Alfresco as much as possible. Okay.
I'm just wondering from cost perspective for all the different, Liferay and Alfresco and whatever other, portlets you're using from different companies like Rivet Logic, how would you recommend doing this in a low cost? Because when my administrators in the organization, they start to see, oh yeah, we should tie this in here and that in there and that in there, and then later down the road you find out, oh, but all these things have licenses attached to them that we actually have to pay a lot for that we maybe didn't expect at first. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, and I know we're out of time, so I'm going to briefly just say that it is perceived as high cost because you are thinking about Liferay and Alfresco together. And I think it's a perspective. It's all about the way you look at it. The better way to look at it is don't look at Liferay and Alfresco as one thing from a licensing perspective, and I want to reduce the cost of that. You should look at Alfresco standalone. This is my infrastructure piece, and then Liferay is an application. It's a use case, much like any application you might be purchasing that's going to integrate over CMIS into Alfresco, and it has its own licensing, and you are purchasing that because you have that need, right? You have Alfresco. You're purchasing Alfresco as an infrastructure tier, okay? And you purchase Liferay because you want a portal. You want an intranet. You get Liferay. You want something else, any other application that integrates into Alfresco, like Kofax, for example, right? They have an integration with Alfresco, and they have licensing. People typically wouldn't be asking, why do I have to pay for Kofax and Alfresco? But unfortunately, people keep asking, why do I have to pay for Liferay and Alfresco? Because they think of it as one thing, and it's not. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you very much.